The voicemail came in at 6:14 on a Tuesday morning, and I only heard it because I'd left my phone on the bathroom counter instead of the nightstand. I was brushing my teeth, still half asleep, still wearing the old McGill sweatshirt I'd stolen from my husband 3 years ago and never given back. Callum was downstairs making coffee. I could hear him moving around the kitchen, opening the fridge, closing it, the soft click of the Keurig starting up. Our dog, a ridiculous golden retriever named Biscuit, was probably sitting at his feet, waiting for a piece of toast crust because Callum always gave in, always, no matter how many times I told him to stop. The number on the screen wasn't one I recognized, a 416 area code. Toronto. I almost deleted it without listening. But I was standing there with toothpaste foam in my mouth and nothing else to do for 30 seconds, so I pressed play. Good morning. This is Claire Nakamura from Wexler, Bryce & Associates, calling for Callum Firth. We're following up regarding the transfer documents for the Collingwood property. The closing date is this Friday, and we still need the co-signature from your spouse. Could you or your wife please return this call at your earliest convenience? We'll need her in person with valid ID. Thank you. I stood very still. Toothpaste dripped off my chin onto the counter. I watched it land on the marble and just sat there, a little white dot, while the words replayed themselves in my head. Transfer documents. Collingwood property. Co-signature from your spouse. Closing date is Friday. We did not own property in Collingwood. We did not own property anywhere except the semi-detached in Leslieville that we'd bought together 2 years ago with a down payment that had taken us 4 years to save. I knew our finances. I managed our finances. I was the one who tracked the joint checking account, the TFSA contributions, the RRSP allocations, the mortgage payments that came out on the 1st and 15th of every month. I knew where every dollar went because I had grown up watching what happened when you didn't. I rinsed my mouth. I wiped the toothpaste off the counter. I saved the voicemail. And then I walked downstairs and sat across from my husband at the kitchen table, and I drank the coffee he handed me, and I said, "Thanks, babe," and I watched his face for anything, any flicker, any tell, any crack in the easy Sunday morning calm that I had loved about him since the day we met. Nothing. He smiled at me over his mug and said, "You sleep okay?" "Like a rock," I said. And that was the first lie I ever told him. I need to go back, though, because this doesn't make sense without context. Without understanding who I was, who Callum was, and what I believed we had built together, you'd just think this was a story about real estate paperwork. It wasn't. It was a story about the distance between who someone shows you they are and who they actually are, and how that distance can swallow your entire life if you're not paying attention. I grew up in Gatineau, on the Quebec side of the river, close enough to Ottawa that we could see the Parliament buildings from the bridge. My mother was a receptionist at a dental clinic. My father drove a delivery truck for a furniture company until his back gave out when I was 14. And after that, he collected disability and spent most of his time in the basement watching RDS and pretending he wasn't in pain. We spoke French at home and English at school, which meant I grew up with 2 versions of myself and got comfortable switching between them early. We weren't poor, exactly, but we were close enough to taste it. My mother kept a spreadsheet, a physical one, printed out and taped to the inside of the kitchen cupboard, where she tracked every expense down to the cent. I grew up understanding that money was not a thing you took for granted. It was a thing you watched, a thing you respected, a thing that could disappear if you blinked. I got a scholarship to McGill for commerce. I worked weekends at a cafe on Rue Saint-Denis and tutored first-year accounting students for $25 an hour. I graduated with minimal debt, which felt like a miracle, and moved to Toronto for a junior analyst position at a commercial real estate firm in the financial district. By the time I was 29, I had a salary I was genuinely proud of, a studio apartment on Queen East that I'd furnished slowly and deliberately, a TFSA maxed out every January, and a morning routine that I protected like it was sacred. Up at 6, coffee, 20 minutes of stretching, walk to the office along King Street, and a mental list of 3 things I wanted to accomplish that day. I was not a person who left things to chance. I planned, I prepared, I built. My best friend Tessa, who I'd known since Frosh Week at McGill, lived in Kensington Market and made documentary films about things no one else would think to make films about, like community fridges and overnight security guards and the women who run those tiny alteration shops on Spadina. She was the person I called when I needed someone to tell me the truth, even when the truth was uncomfortable. My other close friend was Ria, who worked in compliance at one of the big banks and had the sharpest mind of anyone I'd ever met. Ria was the person I called when I needed a plan. I met Callum at a friend's cottage weekend in Muskoka, Labor Day weekend, 3.5 years before that voicemail. It was one of those late summer weekends where the light on the lake turns everything amber and you can feel autumn waiting just behind the tree line. There were maybe 12 of us, most of whom I knew loosely through Tessa. Callum was someone's coworker's friend, a +1 who'd from Barrie in a truck that looked like it had survived at least 2 Canadian winters too many. He was not my usual type. I dated men in finance, men with firm handshakes and strong opinions about index funds, men who understood my language. Callum was a project manager for a construction company. He wore broken-in Blundstones and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. He had a kind of physical ease that I noticed immediately, the way he moved through a room without needing anyone to look at him. He helped carry the coolers in from the cars without being asked. He built the fire that night without making a production of it. We ended up on the dock together after midnight, feet in the water, sharing a bottle of wine that someone had left on the kitchen counter. The lake was black and still. I could hear loons somewhere far out. "You're the one who works in real estate, right?" he said. "Commercial, not residential. I don't help people buy cottages." He laughed. "Good, because I definitely cannot afford a cottage." I liked him immediately. Not in a dramatic, heart-stopping way. In a way that felt like sitting down after a long day. Like something that had been slightly off balance clicking into place. We dated for 1.5 years before he proposed. They were good months, genuinely good in the way that doesn't make for exciting stories, because there was nothing to survive, just 2 people figuring out how to build a life in the same direction. We went to Montreal for long weekends to visit my mother, who fed Callum tourtière, and spoke to him in French that he couldn't understand but tried to follow with this earnest, furrowed brow concentration that made her adore him. We drove to Barrie to see his parents, Doug and Cheryl, who lived in a bungalow near the waterfront and treated me like I'd always been part of the family. Doug showed me his ice fishing setup with the quiet pride of a man revealing something important. Cheryl made butter tarts from scratch every time we visited, the runny kind, and wrapped extras in foil for us to take home. Callum proposed at the St. Lawrence Market on a Saturday morning. He'd hidden the ring in a paper bag from the Pea-meal bacon sandwich stand, which is either the most romantic or the most ridiculous proposal in Toronto history, depending on your perspective. I said yes with mustard on my fingers. We bought the house in Leslieville 8 months later, a narrow semi-detached with original hardwood floors and a backyard just big enough for Biscuit to run circles in. The down payment was $87,000. I can still feel the weight of that number. We'd built it together, dollar by dollar, his savings and mine pooled into a joint account that we both contributed to equally, because that was how I wanted it, and Callum had agreed without hesitation. We got married at Toronto City Hall on a Wednesday in March. It was a small thing, intentional. Tessa and Ria as witnesses, his parents, my mother, and lunch afterward at a restaurant in the Distillery District. No big production, just the people who mattered and a meal that cost exactly what we'd budgeted. That was who we were. That was who I thought we were. Now, the voicemail. I waited until Callum left for a job site in Scarborough. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and my phone, and I did what I do best. I researched. The first thing I did was call the number back. A receptionist answered. "Wexler, Bryce, and Associates, how can I help you?" "I'm returning a call from Claire Nakamura," I said, "regarding a property in Collingwood." "One moment." Claire Nakamura came on the line. She had the efficient, pleasant voice of someone who handles other people's paperwork for a living. "Yes, thank you for calling back. We're handling the transfer for 14 Birchwood Lane, Collingwood. We have Mr. Firth's signature, but as his spouse, we'll need yours as well for the title transfer to go through. Are you available to come in before Friday?" "Can you tell me a bit more about the property?" I said, keeping my voice casual, curious, the voice of a woman who maybe just needed a reminder about which property this was among the many properties her husband might be involved with. "I want to make sure I have the right file." "Of course. It's a waterfront cottage, 3 bedrooms. The purchase was finalized 4 months ago. The current transfer is moving the title from the numbered company into your husband's personal name. Standard restructuring. 4 months ago, a numbered company. And the purchase price?" I asked, because I couldn't stop myself. "I have it here as $625,000. The kitchen was very quiet. Biscuit was asleep under the table. I could hear the fridge humming. "Great," I said. "I'll check my calendar and call you back." I hung up and sat there for a long time. $625,000. We had $11,400 in our joint savings. Our mortgage was $487,000. We made good money together, but not buy a cottage without telling your wife money. Not even close. Where had $625,000 come from? I opened my laptop and logged into our joint accounts. Everything looked normal. Checking, savings, mortgage, credit cards, all exactly where they should be. No large withdrawals, no unexplained transfers, nothing. Which meant the money hadn't come from our accounts. Which meant there were other accounts. I called Tessa first. I told her what I'd found, and she was quiet for about 5 seconds, and then she said, "Nadia, do not say a single word to him until you know the full picture." "You hear me?" Not a word. Then I called Ria. Ria listened without interrupting, which is how I knew she was taking it seriously, because Ria interrupts everything. When I finished, she said, "Okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to pull both your credit reports, you're going to do a property title search through Service Ontario, and you're going to look up that numbered company through the Ontario Business Registry. You can do all of that today from your kitchen table without him knowing. Start there." Ria was always right. That was why she worked in compliance. I spent the rest of that day on my laptop while Biscuit slept at my feet. I pulled credit reports for both of us through Equifax. Mine was clean, exactly what I expected. Callum's was not. There was an open line of credit I'd never seen before, $200,000 limit through a credit union I didn't recognize. There was a business credit card with a $15,000 balance. There were 2 vehicle loans, one for his truck, which I knew about, and one for something else, which I did not. The Ontario Business Registry showed me the numbered company. It had been incorporated 18 months ago. Callum Firth was listed as sole director. The registered address was a P.O. box in Barrie. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen, and I felt something shift inside me, some fundamental orientation, like the floor of my understanding had tilted 2 degrees and everything was starting to slide. 18 months. This company had existed for 18 months. That was 6 months before our wedding. He had stood across from me at City Hall and said his vows, and he had this running in the background the entire time. A company I didn't know about, a credit line I didn't know about, a cottage I didn't know about, an entire financial life that existed parallel to the one we shared, invisible, walled off, mine to discover only because a lawyer's assistant had called the wrong phone number on a Tuesday morning. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that. I didn't throw anything, didn't scream, didn't collapse. Something in me shifted into a gear I didn't know I had, cold and focused and absolutely relentless. My mother's daughter, the woman who tracked every cent on a spreadsheet taped inside a cupboard. I was going to find out everything before I said a single word. The thing about being good with money is that you understand how it moves. You understand the language of it, the paper trails, the way every dollar has to come from somewhere and go somewhere, and if you know where to look, you can follow it. I knew where to look. Over the next 6 days, I built a file. I did it the way I would build a financial model at work. Methodically, thoroughly, without emotion. I pulled land registry records. I requested copies of the numbered company's annual filings. I found the credit union where the line of credit was held and, using information I had access to as his spouse, confirmed the account balance and transaction history. I spoke to a family law lawyer named Patricia Okafor, whose name Ria had given me, and who told me in very clear terms what my rights were under Ontario family law, what constituted matrimonial property, and what I should be documenting. And during those 6 days, I lived my life as if nothing had changed. I made dinner. I walked biscuit. I watched TV with my husband on the couch, his arm around me, and I laughed at the things that were supposed to be funny, and I said, "I love you," before bed, and I lay next to him in the dark, staring at the ceiling whilst he slept, and I thought about every conversation we'd ever had about money. Every time I'd said, "Let's wait on that, we can't afford it right now." Every time I'd packed lunches instead of eating out to save $15 a day. Every time I'd calculated whether we could afford a weekend trip or a new piece of furniture or an extra contribution to our TFSAs. Every time I'd said no to something I wanted because I was being responsible, being careful, being the person who watched the money because someone had to. While he had a $200,000 line of credit and a $625,000 cottage on Georgian Bay. On the 3rd day, I drove to Collingwood. I told Callum I had a work meeting in Barrie and would be back late. The drive took about 90 minutes from the city. 14 Birchwood Lane was a cedar-shingled cottage with a stoned chimney and a wraparound porch that looked out onto the water. It was beautiful, the kind of place I would have dreamed about if I'd let myself dream about things I thought we couldn't afford. I parked across the road and sat in my car and looked at it. There was a truck in the driveway that I didn't recognize, as through the front window, I could see lights on inside. Someone was there. I took photographs. I noted the license plate of the truck. Then I drove home. Ria ran the plate for me through a contact she had. I didn't ask how, and she didn't offer. The truck was registered to a woman named Jolene Pruitt, age 33, with an address in Barrie. That name hit different than the financial discovery had. The money was betrayal in the abstract, numbers on a screen, systems and structures, and secret accounts. A name was a person. A person with a truck parked in the driveway of a cottage my husband had bought without telling me. I found her on social media within 20 minutes. She worked at a physiotherapy clinic in Barrie. She had a dog, a chocolate lab. She posted pictures of sunsets over water, and in several of them, I could see the porch of 14 Birchwood Lane in the background. She had been posting these pictures for over a year. In one photo from the previous Thanksgiving, there were 2 wine glasses on the porch railing. The caption read, grateful for this view and the person I get to share it with. Thanksgiving. While Callum and I had been at his parents' house in Barrie eating Cheryl's turkey, he had been, what, sneaking out? Making excuses? I tried to remember that weekend and couldn't place anything specific, which was almost worse than remembering a lie, because it meant his lies had been so smooth they hadn't even registered as moments. I went further back through her account. A year and a half of posts, hiking photos from Blue Mountain, a shot of 2 pairs of boots by a fire, a birthday post with a cake that said J+C in icing, which was so absurdly on the nose that I almost laughed. J+C Jolene and Callum. While I was packing lunches and tracking our joint checking account and believing we were building something together. I took screenshots of everything. I saved them to a folder on my laptop that I titled Q4 Market Analysis because I am nothing if not thorough. On day 5, I called Patricia Okafor again. I told her what I'd found. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "This changes the picture significantly. The numbered company, the undisclosed property, the hidden debt, these are all relevant to equalization. And the relationship raises questions about the timeline of asset acquisition. I want you to come in tomorrow and bring everything." I went to her office on Bay Street with a folder that was 47 pages thick. Patricia reviewed it with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen this before, many times, and was no longer surprised by any of it but was still, I could tell, quietly impressed by the documentation. "You've done exceptional work," she said. "I'm an analyst," I said. "This is what I do." She outlined my options. She explained equalization payments under Ontario's Family Law Act, how the cottage and the numbered company's assets would factor in, what Callum's obligations were, and what I was entitled to. She told me that his failure to disclose these assets was a serious issue, and that a court would not look kindly on it. "When do you want to have this conversation with him?" she asked. "Sunday," I said. "Why Sunday?" "Because he's planning to take me to the cottage. He mentioned it yesterday. Said it was a surprise." Patricia looked at me over her glasses. "He's planning to take you to the cottage that you're not supposed to know about?" He said, "A friend from work had a place in Collingwood and offered it to us for the weekend. A little getaway," he called it. She paused. "That's bold. That's Callum," I said, and I heard something in my own voice that I hadn't heard before, a flatness, a finality, like a door clicking shut. We drove up on Saturday morning. Callum was relaxed, cheerful, singing along to the radio, one hand on the wheel and one hand holding mine. Biscuit was in the back seat with his head out the window. It was early October, and the leaves along Highway 400 were turning, all that copper and red that makes you forget, just for a second, that winter is coming. When we pulled into the driveway of 14 Birchwood Lane, I watched his face carefully. He performed surprise well, I'll give him that. "Nice place, eh?" he said, as if he were seeing it for the first time. "It's beautiful," I said, and I meant it. It was. He gave me the tour like a man showing off someone else's property, pointing out the stone fireplace, the lake view, the dock. I noticed things he didn't point out. The coffee mug in the cupboard with the initial J on it. The women's rain jacket hanging on a hook by the back door, size small, not mine. A bottle of wine on the counter from a winery in Niagara-on-the-Lake that I'd never heard of. I noticed these things, and I said nothing. I smiled and I said, "This is so thoughtful, Cal," and I watched him light up at the praise, and something inside me went very, very cold. We spent Saturday on the dock. We swam. We grilled salmon for dinner. We drank wine on the porch and watched the sun drop behind the tree line across the bay, and I let him believe that this was working, that I was the woman he thought I was, the woman who didn't ask too many questions, who trusted him so completely that she would never think to look. I waited until Sunday morning. We were sitting on the porch with coffee. The lake was flat and silver. Biscuit was lying between our chairs with a stick he'd found. It was the kind of morning that tricks you into thinking everything is fine. "I need to talk to you about something," I said. He looked over. He was wearing the flannel shirt from Muskoka, the one he'd had on the night we met, and for one terrible second I felt the full weight of what I was about to do. "What's up?" he said. "I got a voicemail last Tuesday from a law firm called Wexler, Bryce and Associates. They were looking for you. Something about transfer documents for a property at 14 Birchwood Lane, Collingwood." I paused. This property. I watched his face. The color didn't drain exactly. It was more like watching a mask slip, a micro-expression, a fractional widening of the eyes, a stillness in the jaw before he tried to rearrange everything back into place. "Nadia, I can explain." "I know about the numbered company," I said. "Incorporated 18 months ago. You as sole director. P.O. Box in Barrie." My voice was even. I had practiced this. In the shower, in my car, in the bathroom, at work with the fan running. I had practiced it until it was just words, just information, just facts arranged in order. "I know about the line of credit at the credit union, $200,000. I know about the business credit card. I know about the second vehicle loan." He set his coffee down, his hand was steady, but his jaw was tight. "I also know about Jolene Pruitt." And there it was. The name landed in the air between us and just stayed there, heavy, undeniable. A thing that could not be taken back or explained away or restructured into something more convenient. "Her truck was in this driveway 4 days ago," I continued. "She's been posting photos from this porch for over a year. She has a coffee mug in your cupboard with her initial on it. There's a rain jacket by the back door that isn't mine. I have screenshots, credit reports, title records, and corporate filings. I have everything, Callum. So when you say you can explain, I need you to understand that the explanation has to cover all of it, not just the piece you think I found." The lake was still. A loon called from somewhere out past the point. Biscuit lifted his head, looked at both of us, and put it back down. Callum leaned forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He stared at the deck boards. He was quiet for a long time, and I let the silence sit because I had learned, over 6 days of building a 47-page file, that silence was more useful than questions. "It started as an investment," he said finally. "Don't," I said. Not angry, just clear. "Don't start with the version you've been rehearsing. Start with the truth." He looked at me, and for the first time in 6 days, I saw something in his face that might have been real. He looked exhausted. "I met her 2 years ago," he said, "at a site in Barrie. She was doing physio for one of my guys who'd hurt his back. We started talking. I didn't plan it. I know that sounds like. It sounds like what everyone says. I know." He rubbed his face. "I know. The cottage was supposed to be separate. I was going to tell you eventually. I was going to restructure the company and bring the property into our assets as an investment. That was the plan. I just needed more time." "You needed more time," I repeated, "to figure out how to tell your wife about the secret cottage you bought with secret money for your secret girlfriend." He flinched. That is exactly what it is. I set my own coffee down. You took out $200,000 in debt that I didn't know about. You incorporated a company without telling me. You bought a $625,000 property while I was packing lunches and calculating whether we could afford to replace the dishwasher. You brought me here to this cottage this weekend and pretended your coworker owned it. You lied to my face while I was sleeping beside you, Callum. And the only reason I found out is because a legal assistant dialed the wrong phone number. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. "My lawyer's name is Patricia Okafor," I said. "She's on Bay Street. She'll be in contact with whoever you hire by end of day Monday. Under the Family Law Act, All assets acquired during the marriage are subject to equalization, including the numbered company and this cottage. The undisclosed debts will also be factored in. Patricia will handle the details. Nadia. He said my name like he was trying to reach across something that had already become too wide to cross. I love you. You know that. I know you love the version of your life where you get to have everything, I said. The wife who manages the budget. The girlfriend who doesn't know about the wife. The cottage. The truck. The two lives that never have to touch each other. But that's not love, Callum. That's logistics. I stood up. I called Biscuit, who came immediately because he was a good dog who had never lied to me about anything. I picked up my overnight bag, which I had packed that morning before Callum woke up, and I walked to the car. I'm taking Biscuit, I said over my shoulder. And the car. You can figure out a ride. I drove back to Toronto on the 400 with Biscuit in the passenger seat and the window down and the October air filling the car, and I did not cry. I wanted to. The pressure was there, right behind my eyes, in my throat, in my chest. But I had decided, somewhere in the past 6 days, that I would not give this moment tears. Not yet. Not until I was somewhere safe and on my own terms. Tessa was waiting at my house when I got home. She'd taken the streetcar from Kensington Market, and she was sitting on my front steps with 2 coffees from the Tim Hortons on Queen. She didn't say anything. She just stood up and held me, and I let her, and Biscuit pressed himself against both our legs, and we stayed like that for a while. The separation was filed 2 weeks later. Patricia Okafor was extraordinary. Because I had documented everything so thoroughly, and because Callum's failure to disclose assets was unambiguous and legally significant, the process moved more quickly than it might have otherwise. He didn't contest anything meaningful. I think he was too aware of what I could make visible if he pushed. The equalization calculation was complicated by the numbered company and the cottage, but Patricia handled it with precision. The cottage was sold. The proceeds, minus the outstanding debt, were split. The numbered company was dissolved. I received an equalization payment that, combined with my half of the Leslieville house sale, gave me more financial security than I'd had at any point in my life. I kept Biscuit. That was non-negotiable. Callum and Jolene lasted about 4 months after everything came out. I heard this from Tessa, who heard it from someone who knew someone. Without the secrecy, without the thrill of the hidden life, whatever they had apparently couldn't survive in daylight. I did not feel satisfaction when I heard this. I felt something closer to exhaustion, the tired recognition that some people don't want a real life. They want a performance with a backstage that nobody else gets to see. Cheryl called me once, about a month after the separation was filed. She was crying. She said she was sorry. She was so sorry. She hadn't known, and she wanted me to know that she'd told Callum exactly what she thought of him, and that he wasn't welcome at Christmas until he got his life sorted out. I believed every word of that because Cheryl was Cheryl, and she made butter tarts with her hands and said exactly what she meant. "You'll always be family to me," she said. "I know," I said, and I meant it. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in the Junction. It had tall windows and southern light and a small balcony where Biscuit liked to sit and watch the street. I bought a dining table from a woodworker on Etsy that I'd been looking at for 2 years and hadn't bought because Callum said we didn't need a new table. It cost $2,800, and it is the most beautiful thing I own. I eat breakfast at it every morning. I called my mother and told her everything in French, because some things are easier to say in your first language. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, "Tu as fait exactement ce qu'il fallait." You did exactly what you needed to do. And then she said, "Ton père was the same. Not the cheating, but the hiding, the secret debts. That's why I kept the spreadsheet." I had never known that about my father. I sat with it for a long time. I will not pretend I came through this cleanly. I didn't. I spent weeks replaying everything, lying awake at 2 a.m., scrolling back through 3.5 years of memories and looking for the seams. The late nights, he said, were jupsite problems. The trips to Barrie to see his parents that might have included stops I didn't know about. The way he'd always been a little vague about his company's finances and how I'd interpreted that vagueness as modesty rather than concealment. The truth is, some people are very good at building walls between their lives. They compartmentalize so effectively that the people closest to them never see the architecture. You can't blame yourself for not noticing a room that was specifically designed to be invisible. What I could do, what I did, was decide what happened next. I maxed out my TFSA in January. I started a new RRSP with the equalization payment. I got a promotion at work, senior analyst, with a raise that made me sit in the bathroom for 5 minutes just breathing because I had earned it, every single dollar. I joined a running group that meets Saturday mornings in High Park, and I have made friends there who don't know anything about Callum or Collingwood or any of it, and that feels like a gift. Tessa and I still get dinner every Thursday. We've switched from Thai to a Sichuan place on Dundas that she swears is the best in the city. Ria and I have coffee every other Sunday, and she always asks to see my financial statements, not because she doesn't trust me, but because that's how Ria says I love you. Biscuit is lying on the couch beside me as I tell you this. He is 7 years old and entirely gray around the muzzle, and still the most honest creature I have ever known. Sometimes, when the light in my apartment is warm and the table is set and the coffee is good and I am sitting in a life that I built with my own hands, twice now, I think about that voicemail. The Tuesday morning. The 416 number. The legal assistant who called my phone instead of his, probably because our names were both on some file somewhere, and she just picked the first number she saw. I think about how close I came to driving up to that cottage on a Saturday in October and never knowing that the life I was living had a second floor I'd never been invited to. And I think about my mother's spreadsheet, taped inside the kitchen cupboard in Gatineau, every dollar tracked, every cent accounted for, and I understand now that it was never about the money. It was about knowing. It was about refusing to let someone else's secret become the ground you stand on. Some truths arrive disguised as voicemails at 6:14 on a Tuesday, and the only thing you can do when they come is decide whether to press play.